Hi folks, so we have some dogs barking in the background, but usually my kids are much louder. We used to have a dog named Gibberish, and we didn't have the sense to realize that that kid was a bit cracked. I mean, he probably, if he had been neutered, he would have calmed down. The neighbors hated him. In fact, one of the neighbors tried to poison him, and then eventually we had to take him to the dog shelter. And they said, "Oh, please take him back." I'm like, "He's very aggressive with people." I'm like, "No, I can't." Because the neighbors, they try to kill him, they'll try to kill us next. I mean, that's the way it is when you have to have dogs in this neighborhood. But I ignore all the barking because when I was a kid, I had dogs. I love the dogs. The dogs are the protectors. They were. I mean, they would growl at me occasionally. Like, I remember when we drove down to Florida, and it was a very long, long drive to Florida, to West Palm Beach, and the beach was closed. We drove all this way for a beach that's closed. I don't know what they were thinking, but obviously it wasn't the right kind of thinking. It's like, it's all closed. Why we drive all the way down to West Palm? It's like it's a sewer here in West Palm Beach. Yeah, it's not. It's not Miami Beach, is it? Yeah, I know. Anyway, it's like we took, at least, I think we took Bruni with us, which is short for Brunhilde. She was like a blonde dog. And it's like, I used to use her little, you know how dogs have that cute little, like a fat circle on the top of their leg, next to their butt, and I would use it as a pillow, and she got angry at me. She growled at me. I'm like, wow, that's the first time Bruni ever growled at me or, said anything mean to me, so I must have been really annoying. Because it's a very, 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 very long trip down to Florida if you're driving, especially with a father who, never mind, I won't talk about that. So yesterday, yeah, I got my kid's haircut. Now I won't tell you how many kids I have. It's fewer than a dozen. And I have a kid in his really mid to late 20s who basically has Asperger's syndrome. And I have one who's 10 years old that really is a lot like him. He looks a lot like him, first of all. He's just pale and tall with his blue eyes and his dark hair. I mean, just a beautiful human being, but not so beautiful with his behavior. He was my second. The older son I'm talking about, he was my second oldest. He used to just like act all kinds of weird ways. Yes? Not just yet. Sorry. And I can't go into the details because we would wish not to embarrass anybody. Because they couldn't help it, right? They just couldn't help it. So yesterday I go in to get the second child's haircut, and he has the same syndrome as the other child we were discussing. And this guy comes up to me and says, "Is your kid autistic?" I'm changing the accent to protect the innocent. I said, "Well, yeah." And he says, "Well, I brought my 40-year-old son in here because he's autistic too." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Yeah, I could tell there was something a little bit different about him, about your dynamic there. There was something going on." But he's like a very elderly gentleman, probably in his 70s or his 80s. And he started talking to me. He just talked at length, and I finally said, "Oh, come on, sit down." I mean, it's like the guy's just standing there talking. It's like he wants to spread his little autistic gospel, which I don't blame him for. Well, he says, come on, that's what he said. It's not what I said, folks. Time magazine actually published an article that said there is a link, there is a correlation between certain vaccinations and autism. Why do we want to just throw that out? It's not junk science. It's junk science if you just throw out the correlations. I'm not saying it's causality. I'm saying there's a correlation. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know, because he said, "How many kids do you have?" I said, "Well, I have 9. He said, "How many were autistic?" I said, "Only 2. It's like, I mean, that I could tell. I mean, we all have our little problems, obviously, but he said, well, I'm going to tell my wife. She's in the car. She just waits outside. I'm like, it's very awkward because it's like a few times I kind of waved and I saw she wasn't waving back. I thought maybe she was just kind of jealous or something. So I'm not sure. He gave me his number. He said, you should call me, and then my wife will send you the article from Time Magazine about how vaccines cause autism. And really, I wondered and I suspected. Really, with my older son, I used to, because we were kind of, poor, by the American definition, I would buy a lot of tuna fish. I thought, well, that's really healthy. I would feed him he would eat tuna fish like nothing on earth. He loved tuna fish. I thought, oh my gosh. And then years later I learned tuna fish has dangerously high levels of mercury. I'm like, oh, please God, really? I would never have done that if I had known that there was a risk. They didn't say there was a risk. I didn't know. I thought I was just like buying, ground beef, only cheaper, but tuna fish comes with the price, apparently. I always want to buy tuna fish. Oh, I love that. But please, folks, they even tell you don't feed your cats straight tuna fish. It's going to get them mercury poisoning. I mean, if we're concerned about cats, why shouldn't we be concerned about people too? So, if I haven't lost the number, it might still be in my purse. I'm not really sure because he doesn't know what I do. He doesn't know that I'm a broadcaster and that I don't usually get back to people, and people just have a love and hate relationship with me because it's like, I love what you're saying, but you don't want to have I don't want to have a personal relationship with somebody who's not clearly a disciple of Jesus Christ. And that doesn't mean being part of some sort of like off-splinter cultish group. I'm saying it's the road that I'm walking, And he asked me a few questions. He's like, well, was he ever diagnosed? I said, no, but we did take him in, a month or two ago because he was having issues. And I think that the Ohio State University, cerebral clinic called us or something. It's like, my son, you can't change your biology or your genetics. I mean, you really can't. I mean, are you going to drug him up? Are you going to give him electroshock therapy? I mean, I could use that a lot more than other people could probably. I suspect the medical community, because I don't think that they're being honest, that there is a link. I say a correlation. I'm not saying causality, because as I've said, I've had 9 children. Only 2 of them apparently have autism. Yeah, ADHD. Well, that's, my brother had ADHD. I mean, yes, vaccines do protect us from deadly diseases, but at what point does the vaccine itself become a threat to our well-being? It's just a question, folks, so don't stone me.